Amazing. So thank you all so much for tuning into this week's webinar Wednesday. My name is Stephanie Fox from the Network One. You may know me already from previous webinars, but if not, great to meet you. I will be moderating this webinar today. We have Paul and Lizzie on the call, and they will be on hand to help out if you would need them to. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speakers. We're going to have a 5-minute introduction now. Then our speakers will talk for about 35 minutes. After that, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A, and we will finish by 1:55 London time, so you can be ready for your next virtual appointment. So I've muted everyone's microphones. Please do keep them muted at all times. If we're calling you to ask a question, we'll unmute them for you. That being said, please do keep your videos on so that our speakers have some friendly faces to present to. We're going to have a Q&A portion at the end, but if you think of a question that you'd like to ask while they're speaking, you can send that directly to me. So to do that, you just go to a chat box where it says to, there's a drop-down menu, and instead of everyone, select Stephanie Fox. I'll go through all of the questions and I'll select a few to ask our speakers once they've finished speaking. So if you have any questions, send them straight to me that way. If you'd like to ask a question yourself, just say so. Or if you prefer me to ask for you, that's totally fine, but just write in the comment box. Hopefully you'll have your Zoom viewing mode set to speaker view. If not, just click speaker view at the top right of your screen. Our speakers will be sharing slides on their screens. So if you can't see their speaker window when their slides are on the screen, just select show active speaker video. If you have any technical issues, you can message Lizzie Gold, who is right here in the chat. You can message her directly in the chat, or you can email Lizzie at lizzie.gold@thenetworkone.com. We're currently recording this webinar and we will distribute it to everyone afterwards. So if you prefer not to make notes, that's totally fine. And if for any reason the whole thing crashes and logs you out, just use the same link that you used to log in this afternoon. Thanks very much, especially if you've had that before. Thanks for your patience. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers. So we have two speakers today. They are Ian Bates and Beth Pope. They are two of the founding partners of Firehouse, along with Nick Bartram and Sarah Platt. Nick describes Beth as super smart and super driven. Beth's point of view has been constantly sought by clients and colleagues alike. She has an uncanny knack of immediately getting to the heart of the business problem, yet never lets her laser-sharp focus get in the way of truly creative thinking. And Sarah says about Ian, funny, driven, and gently self-deprecating in equal measure. To see Ian energized by ideas and igniting the sense of possibility in others is always a joy. Today, Beth and Ian will be discussing how to identify and overcome the creativity gap at work. Firehouse has been running their Conditions for Creativity assessment tool with agencies before and throughout the pandemic, helping them to identify where their creativity strengths and weaknesses lie. They've identified a creativity gap between workplace and individual creativity, identifying how much of a problem there may be. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to turn over to Beth and Ian.
Thank you very much. That's great. And thank you to Julian, Paul and Lizzie from Network One for inviting us to be part of this fabulous series of webinars. They've been excellent. And I think we've made a number of good friends during these sessions, and I see some of them are here today. So that's marvelous. Thank you. What we're going to share with you is a problem that we've seen in the industry. In fact, it's the reason why we launched Firehouse. We're going to tell you how we have then approached that problem and what we've learnt during the past 16 months that we've been running. And as Steph said, feel free to ask any questions. And if you want to pick up with us after the event, that's fine. We do love a chat. So, creativity. In theory, everybody wants it. In practice, it's sadly missing in action. Just a poll towards the end of last year by Dentsu, our global CMO poll, suggested that 85% of CMOs saw creativity as the single most important capability for the future success of business. but only I think 52% believe they were actually getting it, which sounds rather generous actually. I also note that Gartner see creativity as a hallmark of high-performing teams. Actually, it's a fuel for high-performing teams. It's not a byproduct. So it's something that you can work at to bring in. But how many are actually doing that? How many high-performing teams are there? So to us, there is a gap between what business leaders in agencies and brands want and what they actually do. Now, you can't have enough creativity, but you can have too little, of course. And we think that's where the industry is in danger of ending up. And what happens? Well, efficiency comes in to fill the void. It's led to picking solutions from a menu, not problem solving. And that's another gap. We're trying to solve business problems that don't actually relate to customer problems. So ultimately, research tells us that customers are feeling stalked and bombarded. I think that's generous. I think with our own eyes and our own ears, we know that things aren't quite right. Over 1 billion people with ad blockers on, etc. We seem to have stopped solving problems for people. We've stopped solving problems in the real world, where real people live. And those people are a little bit like you, probably a little bit less like me, when we're not at work. We somehow become some other kind of being when we go to work and forget all the things that we feel as normal humans. So that is why we started. Let me just launch the presentation. We wanted to help businesses overcome the creativity gap because the value that we place on human beings' creativity is enormous.
So sorry to interrupt you. Are you supposed to be screen sharing right now because we can't see your slides? Sorry.
Okay. So that's why we started, to help businesses overcome this creativity gap, because we place enormous value on the creativity of human beings, and we want to see that released to make agencies and brands better products, better services, better communications, for goodness sake. Patrick Collister did a great webinar a few weeks back about how poor communications are. I think he used another word. We want to see more purposeful brands, more curious people, and more effective cultures. Now, I'm still waiting for a lawsuit from Oprah Winfrey about this slide, but let's keep going. Broadly speaking, we also see another gap, and that is between the haves and the have-nots. Those who have harnessed the power, the renewable energy, if you like, of creativity, and those who haven't. If you're a have, then you know that creativity is the fuel behind adaptability, resilience, and the growth of the business. And you know how great that feels. But if you're a have-not, now things aren't quite so good. Creativity and innovation and maybe motivation are low. Everything feels like hard, unrewarding work. If you're a have, you want more. The challenge is how? How did you get to where you were? Will you upset the balance to try and get more of it? What are the conditions that allowed you to become creatively successful? And if you're a have-not, then you need to rediscover creativity fast, because your survival will depend on it. Now, we've all seen brands and agencies rise and fall and keep falling until they're gone. They might be there in name, but the thrill has gone. The renewable energy of creativity has maybe run out. People just turn up to work, to get a paycheck. And who the hell wants that? I'm sure we've all been there at some point in our careers. It's not great. So what do the haves and the have-nots have in common? Neither can wait. Time is going to wait for nobody. Every sector is being disrupted, ours included. So time is of the essence. If you want to drive innovation, improve collaboration, build shared values, increase motivation, and foster a can-do spirit, you need to start now. Now, you might recognize some of your clients in this story. You may even recognize your own agency. Is there a gap between what you or your clients want to be and what you or they are? So we knew why we were launching Firehouse. We knew our mission. We had to set about working out how we were going to solve it. Now, we've worked with brands nationally, internationally for many, many years. We've helped launch and lead agencies from small independents through to sale and big publicly owned businesses. And we've run creative, strategic, client services and finance teams. So we applied all of this hands-on practical experience to try and understand the fundamental conditions required to fuel creativity. And when we exhausted our own brains, we got some help from some bigger ones. Unfortunately, there is an awful lot of academic research out there we have studied over a long period of time and very intensively during the lead up and subsequently the launch of Firehouse. And there is a consensus, or certainly academic consensus, around how creativity and innovation is best unlocked. And then we engaged the brains of associates and our very own fire crew, a disparate range of experts from psychotherapists and organizational psychologists to agency group founders, digital transformation specialists, software engineers, musicians, etc. And although there may be nuances in language and different aspects focused on, pretty much everything we have learned can be encompassed in 3 categories and their constituent parts. And so the 9 conditions for creativity was born from this work. And we've seen these played out time and again in our experience. So let me just run you through what those are. The 3 headings: purpose, people, and culture. Under purpose, the 3 components are belief, the core idea that your brand stands for; focus, the proposition for your brand; and ambition, the objective that embodies your belief. Where do you want to go? Under people, imagination, of course, one of our defining human capabilities, creating new ideas that actually don't exist, the ability to project forward and back. Motivation, because without intrinsic motivation, creativity actually grinds to a standstill. Extrinsic motivation doesn't work as well. And expertise, contrary probably to a lot of belief, the more you know, the more you have to work with and the more you can challenge conventions. I think the perception is the least you know, the more you can challenge conventions, but academic study doesn't bear that out. And then culture, behaviours, the pattern of behaviour and social capital that's built up between colleagues and leaders. Support, the technical resources and tools, yes, but also the time and attention people get from colleagues, leaders, and external experts. And then finally, environment, very often overlooked. Where you think is as important as how you think. And that is certainly something that we have been very aware of with our conversations since lockdown, with more and more people working from home, and that likely to continue. How big a role our environment is going to play on the creativity within businesses. So that's the kind of why and how of Firehouse. But what have we learnt? Well, over to Beth.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, thank you for that. I'm presuming you can hear me, yeah? Cool. In marketing, I guess it doesn't matter what size or type of business we have. Creativity is, to a large extent, our engine. And I was thinking about that earlier this morning, actually, and bear with me on this analogy, but I think a lot of the time we're a little bit like delivery van drivers, in that we are rushing about from one delivery to the next. You know, as soon as one consignment's been dropped off, we're on the clock to deliver the next one. And actually, it's really hard in those circumstances to have the luxury of time to stop and check, you know, the oil levels, the tyres, the engine itself. And yet we are relying on, we're effectively trusting that engine to take us the thousands of miles that we need to go to get to where we're trying to get to. And, you know, if that engine splutters a bit or stalls or a warning light goes on, it's sometimes quite difficult to know what the actual root cause is. I'm just going to share a little story with you from my own career that will illustrate that, and maybe it'll resonate with some of you. I'd love to know if it does. For 6 years, I was managing director of a CRM agency, and we'd been acquired a few years earlier by a network. We were a top 100 digital agency in the UK. We had 9 million turnover. We had nearly 100 lovely, talented staff who were really passionate about doing great work. You know, so okay, there were maybe a few little bits of sign of wear and tear around the edges, but we were pretty confident, you know, that our engine was in good nick and was going to get us where we needed it to be. Now, as a CRM agency, you know, data and tech was core to our offering, and that was a little bit of a pressure point, if I'm honest, as it is for a lot of businesses in that space. You know, the world of marketing, software, technology, automation was kind of exploding and becoming ever complex and interrelated as it continues to be. And we knew that if we were going to give our brilliant tech and data teams the best possible chance of coming up with the right solutions for clients, we were going to need to adapt how we were working and to give them the kind of time and headspace and focus they needed to get the solutions right. And so we shifted around where they sat, how they worked together. We brought in various project management tools. We implemented some agile sprint methodology, and you know, that worked. That was all good. But I think what we then realized over time was that we were still focusing kind of at the end phase of the process, and that if we wanted better work, we needed to integrate that thinking right from the start, alongside the strategic thinking and the creative solutions. So we then set about reorganizing the entire agency into multidisciplinary teams, along the lines of Spotify's hub framework, if any of you are familiar with that. And it had been much praised at the time as a way of kind of generating fresh thinking and delivering work in a quicker, easier way. And we thought, if we do that, if we put the client services teams together with the creative teams, strategy, data and tech, you know, all swarming around a client problem, we'd be able to think on our feet better, and we'd be able to innovate better. The only problem was that our client advocacy scores continued to go down. Our score for proactivity was not where we wanted it to be, and nor, to be honest, was value for money. And I've obviously reflected, as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot since then as to why that was. But I think it's really only since we've focused and honed in on developing the conditions for creativity framework that I've really understood, or what's become clear is the gaps that were missing in our thinking, the things that we were not looking at in conjunction with those very valid and very reasonable initiatives that we brought about. So I guess it seems fitting today that my job is to share with you some insight around where agencies get it right, and sometimes where agencies make mistakes when they're creating the conditions for people to do their best work. Because honestly, believe me, if you know, you might think that you are tuned into your clients' needs or your staff sentiment, you may think you're really aware as a leader, but there are always going to be instances where there are things that you just don't see or don't know. So the insight I'm going to share today comes, as I think Ian mentioned, from Spark, and Spark is the assessment tool that we have developed off the back of the Conditions for Creativity framework. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen and just share exactly what that is, so that you know what the context for what I am talking about. So I'm just going to check that you guys can see that. I'm going to assume yes. Cool. So Spark, what is it? The principle behind the Spark assessment is that it allows a business to objectively understand how it's faring on those 9 conditions for creativity that Ian talked about. And therefore, off the back of that, it's helping businesses steer how they prioritise future focus or effort or investment. It essentially falls into 2 parts. It starts with an anonymous all-staff survey. And the purpose of that is that allows us to gauge the relative strengths and weaknesses across those 9 conditions. And then we use those indicative results to then explore themes in much more detail via in-depth interviews with roughly 10 to 15% of the employee base. And as with any diagnosis, we then recommend potential courses of action, a treatment plan, if you like. We've run it with everything from creative agencies through to research businesses or performance agencies, client-side marketing teams, in-house agencies. So actually what's important to know is the type of business you are doesn't matter. What actually matters is that to have a growth mindset, you have to be open to learning about how you could do things even better. And actually, in terms of learning, one of the key insights we ourselves have learned in the 12 months that we've been running Spark is that it turns out that there is in fact one metric of all of the questions that we ask that indicates overall whether a business is likely to have a problem with its conditions for creativity or not. We call that the creativity gap, and I'll show you how you can measure it for your business without needing any input from us at all. So what is the creativity gap? Within the Spark survey, we ask a lot of questions, as you can imagine, around the various conditions for creativity, but we also ask 2 key questions that are a gauge of sentiment around creativity itself. And the first question is, out of 10, how creative is your company? And then out of 10, how creative are you? And when you subtract one from the other, you get the creativity gap. So you will either have a positive creativity gap, which essentially means that your employees perceive your company to be more creative as a whole than they are individually, or you have a negative creativity gap. So the negative creativity gap means your employees perceive themselves individually to be much more creative than the business that they are part of. And I guess you can see why, therefore, creativity can also correlate to other issues such as, job satisfaction or ambition or personal drive. And it's why actually a number of the businesses that we run Spark with have said this is an assessment not simply of conditions for creativity, but it's almost a health check on the team or even well-being in that regard. So the creativity gap measurement won't tell you why you have a problem or where the problem lies specifically, but you should think of it a little bit like the canary in the coal mine, if you've heard that expression. In other words, it's a good indicator of there being a potential buildup of noxious gases that might spell danger ahead. Conditions that, of course, could ultimately impact your business health. So what do we know about the reasons that businesses either have a positive or negative creativity gap from the work that we've done over the last 12 months with various organisations? Well, there's lots of rich insights, I'm sure you can imagine, but I've chosen just 5 insights to share with you today. The differences between the haves and have-nots is definitely indicated by the data, but perhaps more importantly, it's corroborated by the hundreds of hours of in-depth interviews that we've conducted in the past year. I guess what's particularly relevant to you folks is actually that the majority of businesses that we have run this with have been either independent businesses or owner managed in some way. So, you know, it's certainly true that independent entities are not immune from some of these conditions. So let's start with belief, because everything starts with a belief, doesn't it, really? Why your business does what it does. And if you're a founding partner or an owner of an independent business, then I guess you'll feel that particularly keenly. I know we do as Firehouse. It's spurred us into doing what we do. It's given you drive, it's given you ambition, it gives you focus on a daily basis. But of course, it's equally important for the people around you. So when everyone knows and shares that belief, that's incredibly powerful. And I guess as leaders of a business, that's particularly important because sustaining energy and driving momentum no longer feels like something that sits with you alone. And that's definitely borne out by what we've learned from Spark. So the businesses with a positive creativity gap in Spark tend to be what I have called the visionaries. So the employees in these businesses have a really clear vision of what the business is trying to achieve, and they can apply that to their day-to-day work. It feels really tangible and has meaning at every level of the organisation. Whereas the have-nots from Spark, so those with a negative creativity gap, are around 22% less likely to feel that their leaders have a clear vision. That's not to say, of course, that the leaders don't have a vision, but they're definitely not galvanising people behind that vision, because I think, as we probably all instinctively know, it's not enough simply to have the vision or even to communicate it. It's absolutely vital to know that people understand and share the vision that you have if you're going to ask them to go the extra mile with you to help them achieve it. And I do wonder a little bit, tell me if you agree or not, I'm curious, but whether that's a predicament that independent agencies or owner managed entities have in particular. I think you know, your own individual belief as someone who's founded a business may be particularly clear and motivating for you, but I guess we've got to be careful, haven't we, that that doesn't blind us to other perspectives and checking whether other people feel it as strongly as we do. So the second insight of the 5 is about the knowledge seekers. So if you know why you're in a business, then having a clear understanding of whom you're solving problems for obviously naturally follows on from that, doesn't it? And I think it's very easy for us as senior individuals within an organisation to in many ways sometimes take that for granted. Our experience means that a lot of the knowledge we have sometimes feels, I guess, innate. We forget how we accumulated it. And the roles we have tend to mean that we're talking a lot to stakeholders a lot of the time. We're talking to clients about their business issues. We're getting to grips with customers. It's not so easy if you're a junior member of a team to develop that knowledge or to develop that confidence. You know, they're less practiced at having those types of conversations and knowing what questions to ask. And the nature of their roles obviously means that they are sort of comfortably ensconced, if you like, in their own bubbles, and their daily work is quite detached from the people that you're asking them to solve problems for. So the businesses in the survey with a positive creativity gap are what I've called knowledge seekers. So the employees within these entities feel that they do really have a thorough knowledge of the customers that they are solving problems for as a context for what they're doing. The have-nots, on the other hand, don't feel this to the same degree. The priority in those businesses seems to be more on the completion of tasks. Understanding the wider context to those tasks is either just assumed to be there or not felt to be a priority to, I guess, facilitate in some way, shape or form. And again, I think, you know, as Ian was saying about this new world that we find ourselves in, it's really important when there's remote working that we think about how junior team members in particular, but everyone within an organisation learns and builds their knowledge. You know, a lot of the time it comes through osmosis, and the new setup that we're in, it makes it difficult to just subconsciously listen or observe or take part in conversations. It's really important right now that we think about how we can compensate for that and continue to help people to build their own knowledge. The third of the 5 insights relates to behaviour. So I guess if you have a strong belief as a business, and then you know, have a good understanding of who it is that you're solving problems for, then the behaviours will shape how you go about putting that into action. And a lot of time, those are the unwritten rules of organisational culture. It's about whether you act as an individual or as a team. It's about your appetite for risk taking. Behaviours can constrain fresh thinking, or they can liberate it. And as we know, a lot of company behaviours are shaped implicitly by the leaders of that business. So the leaders of have businesses within the survey are what I've called liberators. So these are the leaders who know that the best ideas are actually honed by teams, not by individuals. And they know it's their job, not their job as the leader, to have all of the great ideas. Their job is to set the conditions for others to also have that opportunity. It also means ensuring people aren't afraid of trying something and maybe failing. You know, innovation is only possible through experimentation, through making mistakes, through sometimes getting it wrong. And we can learn more that way often than from successes. The have-not businesses within the survey, though, are much, much less likely than the haves to say that senior managers are tolerant of failure. And often what we've noticed is that comes hand in hand with the leaders of those businesses being so passionate about what they're doing that they are so full of great ideas themselves. That actually can be really intimidating for less senior members of the team. Or it just makes it very difficult for others of any level of seniority to feel that they've got space to contribute to that idea themselves. Actually, if anyone is interested in this specifically, I've just finished a great book by Matthew Said called Rebel Ideas, The Power of Diverse Thinking. And in that, he talks about the danger of perspective blindness that comes from dominant leader cultures. It's a really good read. I'd thoroughly recommend it if you're interested in understanding that a little bit more. So the fourth of the 5 insights is about the support as leaders that we give those who are working for us in our teams. If you're going to give people the freedom to have ideas and take risks, then you've got to make sure, obviously, that they've got all the support they need to have the best chance of success. The businesses that are haves in our survey are true empowerers. They know that if they're going to give people accountability, they have to support them with the resources they need. So whether that might be training in the soft skills that help creativity, whether that's kind of like stakeholder management or creative thinking or leadership or communication. They make sure that people have access to senior input or external thinkers. And they're much, much more likely to invest in projects outside of, I guess, the day-to-day to-do list, and make sure that those projects are shared around so that everyone can contribute. What we've noticed is that the have-nots quite often tend to gift responsibility and then, unfortunately, leave people to either sink or swim, and assuming, because they've given responsibility, that it's therefore down to that person to control and know what to do with it. as a result of that, the have-not businesses, employees in those organisations are 22% less likely to say it is easy to access senior advice or mentoring. And they're also much less likely to say the business is invested in training for soft skills. So they're being asked to be proactive, but there's also no let up on the day-to-day responsibilities to create that space for that thinking to happen. And last but not least, the fifth insight comes from the environment section of the survey. You know, it's easy to see how behaviours and support can shape the cultural conditions for creativity, but environment is a very important final piece of that jigsaw. And actually, of all of the 9 conditions for creativity, it's environment where we see the biggest gap between the haves and have-nots, those with a positive and those with a negative creativity score. What's really important to bear in mind when I talk about this is that environment isn't just about your physical surroundings. It can be a mental space as much as a physical one. And that's why in this section of the survey, the questions that we ask also look at things like the extent to which creativity is rewarded, the extent to which you feel you're surrounded by diverse people and thinking, the extent to which you feel it's easy to see what impact you personally are having on the business around you. And what we've noticed is that the haves really do understand the link between environment, creativity, and they work hard to actively nurture that. They also really overtly celebrate great thinking. So, for example, the haves are 54% more likely to have a variety of different kinds of workspaces available for their people, and they're much more likely to reward creativity and for employees to feel that they're being given for kudos for the thinking. The have-nots, on the other hand, are much lower than the haves in this regard. You know, they think that great thinking should effectively happen regardless of where it is that you're doing that thinking. And they also put much more emphasis on, I guess, the external signs of effort, if you like. So they'll call people out for putting in long hours and celebrate that, or they'll focus on celebrating the end results. They're not championing the inputs, the steps that are taken to get to those results, or even whether those results aren't ultimately achieved in the end. And I guess, you know, Ian said this already, but working environment is obviously very front of mind for us at the moment. And I think environmental factors need to be considered irrespective of where people are working right now, whether that's going to be a permanent remote working situation or some sort of hybrid model. And, you know, ironically, from my perspective, I think overall we're going to all need to get a bit more creative in that regard in terms of working environment, if indeed we want to be more creative. So those are the 5 insights for today. I hope some of those resonated with you folks. How do you know whether any of those conditions or other ones are strengths or weaknesses for your business? How do you know if you are a have or a have not? How do you keep an eye on the canary in your coal mine? Well, I'd really recommend that as a first step, you could ask these 2 questions of the people in your business, anonymously, obviously. Find out whether you have a creativity gap that means a warning sign that there might be things you need to understand about how you could start to address those. That's it in terms of insight. If anybody has any questions, obviously now's a great time to ask them, or link in with me, or email me, or indeed get in touch with one of the folks at Network One, and we can connect that way. But yeah, there we are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ian and Beth. We have had a few questions in while you've been speaking. So someone has said, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but just to expand, if environment is an important aspect of creativity, do you think the agencies who've given up their offices in a pandemic will suffer in the long term?
Oh, wow, that's a biggie. That's a very Honestly, yes, I do, unfortunately. And I've read a lot out there about staff surveys that have been going on during the pandemic, which are really valid and really important to do, to understand how staff are feeling, and whether they're comfortable working in home environments. But I think the danger there is that you almost don't know what you don't know in that situation, and all of the evidence suggests that creativity requires people to come together and to work in teams, and that the physical way that happens is really important. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that we have to be in the office all of the time, because actually a variety of workspaces can be a combination of both remote and office working, can't it? On LinkedIn yesterday, actually, if anyone is interested, I posted a link to something called, I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, the eudaimonia machine. And it's a concept developed by a Chicago-based architect called David Dewayne. Have a little look, or have a look on my LinkedIn feed if you want to find it. And it's about the concept of the different types of workspaces that we need in order to sort of see our full potential. And I think it's really interesting to think about some of those and the types of work that we do. And some are very much suited to home working environment, I think, and others absolutely aren't. So, sorry, slightly long-winded, but I'm afraid my answer to that is I think it's a mistake.
Fair enough.
One thing to perhaps offer into that is, as part of the armory of ways of working during this period, it's usually possible to meet up outside. So if there are, 2 or 3 or 4 people, no more than 6 in the UK, of course. And if you're in Wales, just don't see anybody. But take an idea for a walk. Walking and the creative process are very, very good partners. So if you can't get into an office together, and you feel the real need to physically be near somebody to work creatively, and I've spent 35 years sat next to creative partners and teams, so I know what it feels like. But taking a challenge for a walk with your partners is a good way of getting around it.
That's really good advice. Thank you, Ian. So someone else has asked for more advice. They've said, with more agencies working remotely at the moment, how can agencies ensure expertise and knowledge is best shared with junior colleagues? Do you have any tips?
Oh, wow. Yes, a few thoughts on that. Not in anything that kind of resembles a meeting of sorts. It's really hard, isn't it? Ian gave a great one earlier, which was actually to actively go and get people to do or experience or read something that they would never normally do, and come back and share and discuss that, and actually have it as a different type of forum that's set very much apart from the day-to-day activity that you're engaged in. Because there's all sorts of stimulus that can help you think differently around the problem that you're facing.
And I think another way is to diarise what you could loosely describe as an inspiration session, where you, as a leader, a team leader or a business leader or whatever, you encourage people to bring things that have been inspiring to them and actually talk about why. Why is it inspiring? What is the idea? What is interesting about it? What can we learn from it? And then that means that the knowledge share is two-way rather than one-way. We do have a bunch of training courses, and we call the whole package creativity exchange, because we believe very strongly creativity is almost like an international exchange, isn't it? Cultural exchange. It's two-way. So whilst I may be long in the tooth and have, probably, experience that more junior people haven't had, that I can share, their perspective will keep me alive. Yeah. So I think that's it. Possibly diarise some form of inspiration session.
Brilliant, thanks so much. So I think we've got time for about one more question. Someone in the audience has said, in your experience, when an agency starts to lose its creative mojo, how easy is it to engage people and to engage the agency team to change direction?
Do you want to take that one, Ian, or shall I?
Yes, I can, and then you can add. You've seen it from the other side of me as well. So I've experienced both of those extremes. High performing, highly motivated teams, and then enormous slumps. And a lot of that experience has gone into how we have approached the research we've done around these things, these conditions for creativity. Was the question, how do you get it back?
Yes.
Okay, well, the temptation in networks is to sack the creative director. Now that there may be a problem, but you see, but that's a very easy solution, and it is invariably the wrong one, unless they've done something ridiculous. Because creativity doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs to be fed, and it needs to be fed principally, as we now can see in these 9 conditions, by purpose, the people, and the culture. And culture for creativity is enormous. So if a business is struggling and has lost its mojo, there will be a problem in one of those 3 areas: purpose, people, and culture. And you can go and try and work out what those are. I would suggest that the leadership look at the culture that they have created or allowed to create, because I think, in my experience, and where I have been complicit in allowing things to, become a bit stale, that is where you can probably make the quickest impact. Yeah. And the other thing as well is that creativity is not something divorced from us as people. It's not like a technical thing that you can turn on and off. It's an emotional thing, and it needs feeding. So yeah, if culture, I think, is one of the big ones. Oh, and the other big one is that creativity works off of insight. So if the creative has lost its mojo, it's because there's probably no insight.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Beth, do you have anything to add, or can we wrap up?
All I say is I think it's very tempting in those situations to want to sort of point the finger or find people to blame. I think what we all need to remember is, you can take very brilliant people from one environment and put them into another, and their output is entirely different. So it's often your instinct maybe to look first at the people, but it's rarely there that the problem lies.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Thanks so much. All right. Well, I think that is just about all we have time for. So what I'm going to do is share your details on my screen in case anyone has any follow-up questions. So I just wanted to say a really big thank you to Beth and Ian. That was excellent. There were so many useful hints and tricks there. So I think that's something that we can all find useful and apply to our own companies. As I said, if you didn't have time to ask your question, you can contact Beth and Ian via email at Beth@Firehouse, that's firehouse.co.uk or ian@firehouse.co.uk, and that's on the screen now. You can also visit their website, which is www.firehouse.co.uk. Thank you all very much for coming. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be holding webinars at the same time every Wednesday. The next one will be held on the 14th of October, titled Culturally Charged Scenario Planning with Dr. Matilda Anderson. Scenario planning is a tried and tested method for exploring credible alternative futures. It's always a powerful approach, but particularly so as brands look to plan against the uncertainties of life post-pandemic. Pinning a strategy on one forecasted future seems a little unrealistic right now. Instead, scenario planning allows agencies and brands to explore a range of credible futures, including getting beyond the limitations of the official future. In this webinar, Dr. Matilda Anderson, London and Amsterdam Managing Director of Crowd DNA, will teach us their culturally charged version of scenario planning and how it guides their clients to exciting and credible results. The session will demonstrate the relevance of scenario planning to marketing and product teams in areas ranging from brand and comms to new market entries and innovation work. So future webinar Wednesdays can be found on our website under events at www.thenetwork1.com/webinars. Thank you very, very much for joining in. Thanks again to Ian and Beth, and I hope you all have a great day. See you soon.